Hi everybody, I'm Jennifer Tryon. Welcome to the Convertible Clutch sewing class with Cricut. We're using the Cricut Maker in this class, but if you have the Cricut Explore or the Air and you're going to be cutting fabric with the fine point blade, that's great too. But I'll be using the Maker in the class today. So you have got a choice to make. We've given you enough fabric to do either a yellow or a gray purse, or maybe you want to try to do both. If you're doing the yellow, which is what I'm going to be making today, I've got the gray as my liner fabric. So that's cute. You get all the real bang for your buck on the outside. If you want something a little more subtle, you can have the surprise punch of the yellow on the inside of your bag here, which is also kind of a nice surprise and cute. So good luck choosing, because I think they're both equally cute. You also will notice I've got a little wrist strap on the yellow one. This is totally optional. The Cricut will cut it out for you, but you can just omit any of the little strap tabs. Like, it'll cut it out, but you can just set them aside as scrap if you want to just carry this purse. So totally up to you. So you need to have watched the prep video to get your zipper ready and your fabric ready, but make sure you've got your sewing kit out, all the rest of the contents from your kit, your rotary blade, your washable fabric pen, your thread, and make sure that your zipper has the pull on it before you start the class. That's in the prep video. So you can get all your tools out and ready, and we're going to start by prepping our fabric. Okay, so I've got my fabric. Like I mentioned in the prep video, you can wash it if you want. I didn't. I just pressed it and got the bulk of the wrinkles out. So you've got way more than enough fabric here. In fact, you could probably make 2 purses with all of this fabric, which is fabulous. You've also got a choice, gray or yellow. Have you decided yet on the outside or inside? Like I said, I'm going to do yellow on the outside. So that means before I get to my computer or to my Cricut, I need to prep the fabric so that it's ready to cut. So if you've washed it, great, make sure it's ironed. And then I'm also going to iron the interfacing to the back of your exterior fabric. So whichever color you've chosen, whether it's yellow or gray, for your outside, you want your fusible to be ironed onto the back of your fabric. And even solids have a back and a front. It's obviously a little harder to tell and not the end of the world if you get it wrong, but usually if you flip it over, you can see the grain just a little bit clearer on what would be the reverse of the fabric, and the one side is a little bit smoother. So just take a second and take a look at your fabric, and you'll get a chance to see which side is the back or the front. And like I said, it's not the end of the world if it goes on one side over the other. I do though want you to keep the salvage edge. So that's the edge, like the manufacturer's edge here. I do want you to keep that with the long length of your mat. That way your grain is going to be going in this direction. That's just sort of a good rule of thumb. I've got like a little ironing pad down here. You could use your easy press. I'm just using an iron and lots of steam for this, making sure it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to turn the steam off on my iron, because when you're putting fusible on, you just need a hot iron. So the easy press really would be perfect for this. But I'm just using my iron because I've got it out here, and all my easy presses are on display behind me right now. There. So I'm just touching this, and it doesn't take much for this to fuse on. So you don't need to like leave it very long. Just check. I got a little lift on the corner there, but most of it is down. And you definitely don't want any wrinkles. And the reason why you're putting this on is because it's going to help this very flimsy cotton just be a little sturdier for the front of your purse. Makes sense. And this is also why stabilizer, especially fusible like this, you know, get familiar with it because it really can allow you to work with fabrics that you might not be able to normally work with for certain projects because it's too flimsy. It'll, if you put a really, really tough, heavy stabilizer on some of these quilting cottons, gosh, you could really make a very sturdy bag, even something as heavy as a hat if you've got the right stabilizer. And I should have mentioned that there are two sides to your stabilizer, the smooth side and the bumpy side. The bumps are the glue. So you want to make sure that side goes down on your fabric. So once you've got your stabilizer ironed on, I'm just going to quickly cut down the edge so that this will fit on my cutting mat. I'm also going to cut my liner fabric, also the 12 inches, so that it will also fit on my big pink cutting mat. So you can just go ahead and do that now. Pause the video if you want while you get this ready. It needs to fit and not go over your cutting mat. If it's a little off the sticky, that's not the end of the world, but you don't want it going past the edge of your mat because you run the risk of it getting caught in the rollers. So you really want to make sure that it's the right size. Okay, so prep your yellow and your gray and I'll meet you back here. So I'm just going to go ahead and roughly cut off the selvage. We would never use that part in the project anyway, and then that way I can just see the numbers on the mat and I know everything is going to stick and nothing is going to be loose. You could trim off the end if you want, but I actually like to leave it as long as possible because if the design stops cutting somewhere up here, then I haven't inadvertently shortened my piece and I could end up with a much longer piece of scrap. So that's why I let that dangle. Everybody in their kit will have gotten a rotary cutter. Now this rotary cutter here is made specifically for the Maker series of Cricut machines. It has like this little gear on the top and it fits into the Maker and just helps really direct it. Now this is a tiny little rotary cutter, and if you're an experienced sewer you probably have a real life rotary cutter. This is a tiny little one for your Cricut. So it's literally super sharp and it's going to be much more accurate because getting around some of those tight little, especially the notches, whenever you're cutting out your fabric notches, I always find that difficult, both with scissors and a big rotary cutter, but it's no match for the little rotary cutter. So I'm going to go ahead and undo my B port. I'll take out my regular blade and you just install it with the side that's open. It has like a bit of a housing, this clear housing here. You want the side that's open to match up against the gear that's also in the Maker, and just close your door and it's ready to go. So I've got my yellow with the stabilizer on it. I've got my gray with no stabilizer, and I also want a strip of yellow that has no stabilizer on it. This is going to be for the bow, for the zipper tabs, and the little handle. For the piece that has no stabilizer, I'm just going to corner it up. This is how I like to do it. Now, if you only have the one fabric mat that came in the kit, that's cool. You'll just load them up one by one. If you have many mats, then you can get them all on their own mats, but usually I just change them. Okay, and now I'm just going to cut the fabric, and it can be totally rough. You could even tear it, but I like using my new scissors here. Just along the number line on the mat, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect because we're not going to see this edge anyway. The Cricut's going to take care of making sure we have all smooth cuts. Okay, so I've got my yellow loaded up on my mat. I've got my yellow with my stabilizer and my gray with no stabilizer waiting in the wings. So let's go to the computer now and we will get our file called up on Design Space. Okay, so we're looking for the Convertible Bow Clutch. Here we are. And I just want to draw your attention to something. So if we scroll down here, it tells you the finished size is going to be approximately 8 by 10 inches. Unfolded, it's a little bit longer. You've got a bit of a description. You can opt to print this out if you want to keep it by where you're working, or you can just, if you don't have a laptop, for example, or you can just refer to it online. Cricut has also gone ahead and written out a lot of the prep and some instructions for how to put your fabric on your mat, but you know, we're doing it here together. If you had a brayer, you could roll it on top. I don't. So I'm just making sure that it's nice and stuck down with my hands. You could print out these instructions if you want. I also wanted to let you know that there is a PDF. It's the very bottom here. It says Convertible Bow Clutch, and you can click on that and it will call up the actual PDF of this pattern. And the instructions are pretty good. I've gone through it. I'm going to basically take you through all of the instructions. There isn't a whole lot of pictures here, so I do think the video will help, especially if you're new to sewing bags or installing zippers. You'll definitely want to watch the video the whole way through. Pause it if you want to, but this is an extra option for a little bit extra instruction. Okay, let's go back to Design Space. And now I can just press Make It. Easy. There we go. Okay, so the first mat's been called up. It shows we only need a 12 by 12 or a 12 by 12 mat, but I've got it loaded on a 12 by 24. So I'm just going to choose 12 by 24. And it just changed the layout a little bit to help me save a little bit more fabric, which thank you. We always want to save fabric. You'll notice down the left-hand side here, there's two colors. And that's because Design Space automatically sorts all of your mats into different colors. So we will need to do 7 different cuts. So 7 different mats will need to get loaded into the machine. But you'll notice the pink down here, that's the interior fabric. So for this project, it's the gray that's represented in pink here. And then the yellow is represented in the tan. So just remember that when you're loading up your mats. Depending on where you are, you're dealing with either interior fabric or exterior. So we're starting with the exterior. The first thing that it's going to cut is that bow, which is why I've laid down my yellow fabric without the stabilizer on it first. So I've got that nice and on my mat. Now I can just press continue, and you might be wondering, what are these shapes? So this big shape here is the actual bow. This long piece here will act as a strap if you opt to add the strap, like the wristlet. These will be the little attachments for the strap, and these are the zipper tabs. So we can get to all of that when it's time, but just so you know, what you're cutting out on the first mat is the bow and all of the little fiddly accessory parts that don't need stabilizer. The only thing that needs the stabilizer is the front and back exterior fabrics. Okay, so let's get it loaded up. Get going here. We've got parties to go to. We need a little cute purse. All right, it's loaded. I'm gonna press continue. Now, make sure that your machine is connected to your computer, and then it's going to ask me what material I'm cutting, just like it does with any other project. And it does say cotton here under fabrics. And so I can choose cotton. Just remember that a little later on when we're cutting through the stabilizer, we're going to want to switch that to bonded, because we've bonded that stabilizer to the fabric. So just remember that. But for right now, the cotton is what I'm going to pick. The material is loaded, and I'm going to press go. So you can see that little rotary cutter sort of twisting and turning, and it's getting all of those little fabric darts and markers and all of that cut perfectly out. Now we're nearly done. Okay, so we can unload. Now, if you have more than one mat, you might want to just leave this on the mat until you're, completely finished cutting. But we've just got the one here that came in our kit, so I'm going to peel this off. This is super satisfying when you see how perfectly it's all cut. Okay, so there's all my little pieces. Just pull them all off and set them aside. So next up, I'm going to take my yellow with the stabilizer and lay that stabilizer side down on the mat. Again, I'm just lining up, squaring it up. The large scraper you got in your kit would also be a good way to flatten out your fabric. So we're going to be on mat 2 now. And you'll notice that the first thing it's calling for here is for us to load the blue washable pen. So it looks like this. You got one in your kit. So you're going to want to use your marker attachment here. It looks like this little white tube with some kind of cuts in the bottom. So the marker housing goes into A. So then you're just going to click it in, and then you're going to close the door. What I love about this is the Cricut's going to take care of all of those pattern markings for you. No measuring, no having to know if they're even on either side. The Cricut's just going to put those markings for you. Love that. All right, I'm loading this into the machine, making sure my mat is underneath the little guides there. Nice and stuck down. Let's load it. If you find that it doesn't load, like you maybe, kind of pushed it in the wrong spot, it doesn't look totally straight, unload it and do it again. So it's remembering what material we chose from last time. However, this time it's bonded. It has the stabilizer on it. So I'm just going to press cotton, and then I'm going to go to browse all materials, and let's go cotton again and just see what it comes up with. So it's got cotton, cotton bonded, 2 layers, medium fabric like cotton, medium bonded. So I'm going to say this is a medium bonded fabric. We want to make sure that the machine knows to put enough pressure. So you could choose medium like cotton or cotton bonded, but I'm going to go medium cotton bonded just so I don't risk it. So once you've chosen that, your light should be flashing and you can press go. The first thing it's going to do though is do the pen markings, and then it's going to switch over to the cutting. So let's watch the pen. So those pen markings are actually where it's telling you if you want to attach handles or a big long strap to your clutch, that's going to be where you sew. So we can take the pen out. I mean, you could leave it in, but I like to put the cap back on, and if worse came to worse and you got some ink on it, it is washable, but let's just take it out so it doesn't get dried up. And then you'll press go again, and it's ready to use the rotary cutter. So it's asking on the machine about the fine point blade. So if you're using the Explorer or something else, and the fine point blade comes up, that's fine. You can also choose another blade, and we're going to choose the rotary blade. And then we're going to press go. So the machine knows what blade we're using. So if you don't have a maker, you would be using the fine point blade. Okay, let it do its thing. After you've taken the pen out, press go. It's going to cut all the rest of the mats. Make sure you pay attention to when you need to have the pen in and when you need the rotary cutter. And you can pause the video and I'll meet you back here when all your pieces are cut out. Okay, I've got my last interior piece cut. Let's just pull that off. Perfect. And my last exterior piece. If you have a few little spots where it's not totally cut through, don't worry, you can just snip. Just try not to lose any of your darts or anything like that. But even with the regular rotary cutter, there's always a hair or two that just are being finicky. Okay, so we can put our Cricut away and we can put our computer away because now it's going to be time for the sewing machine. So I'm just going to pull all my pieces off. So you should have 2 gray interiors, 2 yellow with the stabilizer exteriors. You've got the piece for the bow, and then you've got these sort of little fiddly bits. So this. So you've got 2 handle pieces and 2 zipper tabs. You've also got a piece if you want to use it as a wrist clutch. If you just want to carry this bag in your hands and not have a wrist strap or a crossbody strap, then you can just remove these little pieces here. We'll just stick with these pieces, the 2 zipper tabs, the bow, and the body of the purse. If you do want to add a wrist strap, which is what I'm going to do in this class, then you can add back these pieces here. Okay, so I've got my yellow pieces cut and I've got my interior gray pieces cut. I'm pulling out some of my tools from the sewing kit we got, which is very exciting. And of course, you should have your zipper prepped by now. In the prep video, I went over how to put the pull on the zipper. So you want to make sure that's ready because we're going to be using that very soon. Also pulled out my little pins. So the first place we're going to start is with the bow. So we can set all the other little pieces aside for now. And I'm going to have my iron and my sewing machine close by. So I'm sewing today on the Janome 6650. This is my favorite sewing machine, big sewing machine. I have some favorite little ones too, but this is the one I use most often. So I'm going to use that today, but whatever machine you've got at home, I'm sure it'll be great. You want to make sure that it's threaded and that you've got thread in your bobbin. Now, you were given yellow thread in your kit. So you can either have a contrasting color with the yellow on your gray, or you can have tone on tone with your yellow. I'm going to sew with white, not because I like that white will look good with the yellow, but just in case I need to show you some of the stitches, you'll be able to see them on camera a little bit better. So you can go ahead and use the yellow thread that was in your kit, but I am all threaded up with white, and that's the reason why. Okay, you do want to make sure you have your iron. So I'll bring the ironing pad over for this so that I can show you what I'm doing. A very big part of sewing is pressing. So you want to always make sure you have your iron handy. You could use your easy press for this too. Okay, so you'll notice here, the Cricut has lovingly cut out those tiny little darts. Do not cut those off because that's going to show us when we're exactly in the middle. And you can already see this looking more like a bow already. So that's the first step here. We're going to want to fold this in half and give it a press. And just try to make sure those darts are lined up. And I really want to stress to you, if this is your first time sewing, or even if you've sewn like for many, many years, it's common to use your seam ripper. We've got it handy. It's common for things to, jam or, so don't sweat it. If you need to pause the video and take your time, go ahead. I'd rather have this turn out. You don't have to do it at the same speed of the video. I just want to reiterate that. Okay, so I've got this folded in half. And now what I'm going to do is with a 1/4 inch, so just a 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to sew right along that open edge. Okay? So if you have a regular zigzag foot on your machine, you can use that and go by the quarter marks that are probably on your machine. But if you have handy and your machine comes with a foot that allows for a 1/4 inch seam, then this would be a good time to use it. So with the Janome, that's the O foot. So I'm just gonna put that on. It just allows us to make sure that the seam is exactly at a 1/4 inch. But honestly, if you sew the bow at a 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch, or if it's not totally straight, no one's gonna know. The seam's going on the inside anyway. We're turning it inside out. Don't sweat it. And I'm just using a regular straight stitch, and my stitch width is at 4.5 and my stitch length is at 2.4. If you like to sew your stitches a little bit bigger or smaller, no problem, go ahead. This is just what my machine automatically sets it at, so that's what I'm using. Now, I am choosing the 1/4 inch stitch, so it moves my needle over a little bit. And because we've pressed this into place, I'm not pinning. I'm just gonna go ahead and just hold the end. If you wanted, you could use some of your new pins that are in your kit, and you could pin it along the edge if you wanted, but this is a pretty small piece, so we're pretty good. Just make sure you don't run over your pins. And no real need to backstitch here because the edge of the bow is going to end up inside the seam. So we're going to have another seam going there anyway, so no need to backstitch. Sometimes when you're done sewing a seam, you can press it just to lock it in place. Good habit. And now we're going to turn this right side out. So if you have any little threads, your kit came with these cute little snips. They're just little press snips like this. So you can snip those off. These are great for threads. So now you've got this tube. So I'm going to just take this seam and just make sure my sewn seam is kind of pressed down. And now it's looking a little more wrinkly, a little less, you know, bring your hot iron to it. Steam and it'll get it looking nice and flat. So the next step is to fold your bow in half again, probably while it's still hot, and just give it a little, wow, that really is hot. Just give it a little finger press here. And you'll be able to see not a full seam, but just a light seam. Now on either side of that finger press seam, we're going to put a row of basting stitches. Now in the actual written instructions, it says to hand stitch your basting stitch, but we've got no time for hand stitching. We can baste on our machine, and I'm going to show you how to do it because it's just faster, it's more accurate, and you'll get a nice even tug. But if you want to get out a hand needle and hand stitch like it says, you do you, no problem. Okay, I'm going to basically line up that middle finger pressed with the center point of my needle. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lengthen my stitch to as long as it will go, which is 5. So you lengthen your stitch for as long as your sewing machine will go. If you have one with knobs, it might be right to the end of 4, but 5 is pretty standard. And what you want to do is make sure you've got a pretty long tail at the beginning and at the end. So I'm going to start stitching just about a 1/4 inch over from that pressed line. And this stitch is going to be nice and long. And now when you get to the end, don't cut it. Instead, roll it towards you, needle up, and pinch the end and pull. So you're getting like this nice long cord here. And then you can either use the cutter on the side of your machine or your little snips. And now we've got this long basting stitch. And what a basting stitch means is it's just a temporary stitch. It's not going to be seen or even stay in your project. So I've got one row and I'm going to do a second row. So, I mean, we could baste it, and it also just means we're gonna pull this up into a scrunchy bow in a minute. But I'm gonna go on the other side too, just a 1/4 inch on the other side of that pressed seam now. And if it's not exactly a 1/4 inch, don't sweat it. Just make sure it's not way over, because we don't want anyone to see it. We want it to be hidden underneath the bow tie. Remember, don't cut it at the end, especially if your machine has automatic scissors. It's kind of like you want to press the button. So, and then pinch and pull up, snip. So now we've got all of these like ugly dangling threads. But this is going to make life very simple when it comes to scrunching this bow together. I mean, we could fold it and have, and that's what we would do if we had a basting stitch, is just get those 3 lines, which that looks good too. But I thought I'd teach you a little bit about basting while I could. So you want to take either 2 of the top threads on one side or the 2 bottom threads, not top and bottom, top and bottom. You want the 2 bottom or the 2 top. So I'm just going to pull the 2 top here. So you can see the 2 bottom are still dangling. I'm going to let those go. So not using those. I've got the 2 top, and then I'm just going to, with my fingers and my thumb, just kind of start pulling this up. And see how I'm getting a nice scrunchy, everywhere there's a long stitch, now we can put like a little pleat. And we'll get a much scrunchier bow. And if we pull from the top again too, we can go from the other side. You're just going to get a nice pull on your bow there. And it's going to naturally want to sit with one end up. So that's the side that we'll use as the top of our bow. So now we're going to actually sew right down the middle here to lock those basting stitches in place. So I can go back down to a regular size stitch. So that's 2.4. And just in the center, kind of where that pressed line was, although we can't really see that anymore. Don't cut any of your threads yet. Sew that basting, that scrunch, all into place. And if you end up sewing over the threads, no big deal. We're just going to trim them all at the end. And you can go back if you want, even across the whole thing, if you want to really secure it. All right, so now we have like, this is gonna last. So now when we pull out those basting stitches, or even just snip them, you can totally pull them out if you want, because they're not tied. Up to you. So you can just pull it right out. Sometimes you can use your seam ripper to pull also. And then you just have your row of real stitches there. Okay, so even if it looks a little like funny, like not, you know, maybe you have a little, like I have a little extra piece there, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it at all. The bow cover is going to take care of that. So next up, I'm gonna take from the small pieces that we cut, these ones, and I'm taking the largest one, and this is the cover for the bow. Now, in the written instructions, it does say to just cover it like this and hand stitch. But if we did that with this fabric, it would slowly start to unravel. You can see mine here is already unraveling. So we really do need to press these seams in. So we can make it smaller like this and make a tube. Or if you still want that wide look, which I think looks actually nicer on this, what you can do, just make sure you trim whatever is kind of off there, and just pull this in about 1/4 inch and press. Again, if it's a little bigger or a little smaller, it's no big deal. The point is that it's going to protect the seams from fraying. So you've got a choice here. You can sew up right on the edge here so that nothing unravels at all. Or if you don't want to see any stitches at all, then you can risk it and just go ahead and sew the two ends together. So I'm going to risk it because I don't want to see those stitches on the outside of my clutch. And I feel like I'm not going to be really hard wear and tear on this. It's not going to be going through the laundry and things like that. So I'm good to I'm going to just flatten that so it's nice and straight. And I'm going to bring this to the machine and I'm going to sew over just the end here about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to go all the way back. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten this seam. I'm going to press this seam open just so I don't have a big lump in the back of my bow. But I am going to take a minute to just trim all of those little threads. And then I'm going to open that seam. Just like that, just like kind of like butterfly wings or like a little bow tie almost. And just press that open. And I'm going to turn it right side out. And so now our seams, if anything's going to come unraveled, it'll be on the inside and we won't see it on our purse. So any little extra threads though, you do want to trim. Let's trim them as we go so that at the end we're not left with a whole bunch of stringy things. Okay, so we can take our bow and sort of like we're doing a napkin ring, just pull this right on over. Now, if it feels a little too floppy or too big, you can make your, you can make this tighter just by, cinching it more. I kind of like that big floppy loose look. If you want, you could hand stitch or tack this down so that it doesn't twirl. But I've made this a couple of times and it's been fine. I've just left it as is. But if you are worried that it's going to move around on you, you could just hand sew this down, or even just with your machine, give a little fold here and tack it down with your machine. Your choice. So now that we have our bow done, we can take one of our exterior panel pieces. Now this is where the little darts come in really handy, those little triangles that should be right in the center of your bow. You've also got them on the edges of your exterior piece, and we're going to line the bow up with these darts. Your seam though should be at the bottom, so towards this part here, so that you're not looking down at your seam. So the fold should be toward you and the seam should be on this end. And let's just make sure those darts are lined up perfectly. Now it might feel a little bit shorter because it's scrunched, but we can go ahead and give it a little stretch in the middle so that those darts are lining up. And we can put one of our new pins, so down and up. And so we can pin the whole thing if we like. You don't have to pin, but it does make things, does help keep things in place and make it more accurate. So if you skip the pinning, you're running the risk. Trust me, I run the risk all the time. Okay, so now remember how we learned to baste? We're going to put a basting stitch just on either side of the bow. And that's just so we don't have to keep pins in the whole time. The basting stitch will help keep things nicely in place. And we're just gonna do it right at the edge, like sort of a 1/4 inch in. And so again, you're gonna wanna increase your stitch length to as big a stitch as your machine will do. And just about a 1/4 inch off of the bow, you can start sewing. Remember, we're not going to cut. And it's right on the edge here. And so press your foot up, needle up, pull, and snip. This time though, we're not going to be pulling. We're just using that basting stitch to keep the bow in place. Lots of patterns call for basting stitches, and it just makes the garment construction, like sometimes you think, oh, this is a waste to have to baste this and then sew it again. But it really does help for there not to be pins everywhere and keep things right where they should be. Pull your pins out, don't run over your pins. Okay, needle up, press our foot up, and pinch and pull towards you. Okay, this is looking good. You can see this comes together pretty fast. Okay, so let's set this piece aside for a second, and it's gonna be time to work with our tabs. Okay, so we've got the strap tabs and the zipper tabs. The zipper tabs are the smaller ones, so we'll set those aside for a second, and now you've got a choice to make. Do you want your clutch to be a true clutch that you just carry, or do you want it to have like a wrist strap or even a crossbody strap? I'm gonna eventually make mine have a little wrist strap. I'm just gonna use one of these tabs. If I wanted this to have a full crossbody, which you would need to cut separately, a big long piece and measure it out, then you would need to put both tabs on. But I'm just gonna use what I've got here. This will be what I use to make it into a wristlet. But it's now time to at least press the tab if you wanna have that on there, and it's gonna go where those fabric markings are. Remember the Cricut put those pen marks on? That's gonna be where these tabs go so that they measure up perfectly. But we have to prep the tab. So let's make sure our piece is nice and flat. And we're gonna fold it in half lengthwise and just finger press. And so when you can see that finger press line, just fold your edge and stop it. That's how you know you're gonna get to the middle. And press. And then fold it the other side toward the middle also. And press. If you have a tailor's clapper, you can just set it on there and that'll hold the seam. And then we're gonna stitch on either side, right on the edge. So what I like to do when I need to stitch right on the edge of something, you could use your edge foot if your machine came with one, or if you've just got a regular presser foot, you can move your needle over. So that's what I like to do. Your stitch width will allow you to move the needle. So if you look, you'll see that it will actually move over. See how I can change the position of the needle with the stitch width? So try to keep your little tiny piece of fabric as centered as you can so that it's under the feed dog, but then move your needle over as far to the left or right as you have to so that you're sewing right on the edge. Make sure you switch your stitch back, your stitch length back to a smaller stitch. And do the same thing on the other side. Now remember, I sewed this in white, but if you're using your yellow on yellow, this will barely be noticeable, which will be very nice. Okay, I'm just gonna lock those stitches in place with a little heat and steam. So now that's gonna lay nice and flat. And I can just put it wrong sides together, snip my little ends of my little thread tails there. And now on my purse, you can choose a side that you want your wrist strap to go on. And with raw edges, you're going to put the raw edges together, just like this, and then pin it. So right where those markings are, and then put that little strap and pin. And now we can just continue that basting stitch there. So I can turn my stitch length back up, put my stitch back in the middle, and just baste that down. That way we know it's not going anywhere. Now it seems a little counterintuitive to have the strap sticking out like this, but it will make sense once this is turned right side out, because then we won't have a seam. And if there's any little threads inside the strap or inside this little hook, now's the time to get rid of them. Okay, we're ready to install the zipper. Okay, well, we're going to set this aside for now. We've got a little more prep work to do on our zipper before we get to sewing it right on. Now, we sent you zippers in this kit that are a little bit wider, like thicker than they need to be. So we're going to sew a little bit closer to the edge. And the zipper tabs that the Cricut cut out are a little bit skinnier, you'll see, than the zipper itself. But I've tried this a couple of times and it works out just fine. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fold our zipper tabs, each of them in half, so the short ends touch like this, so they become like almost perfect squares. And now I want you to take the end of your fabric, and I want to make sure that our zipper, because these zippers are roughly cut, so I want our tabs to sort of end. Where are they? So about half, I think we could probably, from this zipper anyway, yours will be cut like fairly similar, but let's just make sure we don't have too much zipper coming off the end, because we want to be sewing through this zipper tab, not through the actual zipper, or else our corners here are going to be really chunky and bulky because of the zipper. So instead what I'm going to do is just eyeball, because you can see my zipper here, if this were to be installed, would be kind of coming off the edge about, you know, a 1/4 inch on each end. So I'm going to take 1/2 inch, just eyeballing off of each end of this zipper. And this is why I like sewing with zipper tape, because you can make it whatever size you want. I think I could even take off a little bit more. There we go. Okay, I also want to make sure that I don't have a raw edge. So we need to fold the end of the zipper tab under and press. Steam. Again, doesn't have to be completely a 1/4 inch, but about a 1/4 inch, and press. Sometimes I like to use my seam ripper or something metal to just make sure that it's nice, and so I don't have to get my finger in there. And then when it folds in half, you should have no seam. And then this will butt right there against the end of the zipper. So I want to make sure I'm not pushing my zipper all the way to the end, because I want to sew this down straight across here, just over the edge that's folded under, just under that 1/4 inch. Like I said, I want the extra part of this zipper, or the extra part of this zipper tab, to be what I sew my actual purse to. So leaving this part a little dangling off the end. I don't want the zipper to be butted right up against it. If I butt the zipper right up against it, it's just going to be too chunky when we turn the purse inside out. So I'm going to put a little pin just through the end here so that it stays when I bring it to the machine. And I'm not using my zipper foot yet. I'm just sewing right along that edge. So I'll sew it and then I'll show you what yours should look like. This can be an even smaller stitch. It could be at like a 1.9 or a 2. So I've got a row of stitches here, and this is sort of like flapping at the end. So I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Make sure my end is turned under that 1/4 inch so that we don't have a fraying seam. Holding that down with my seam ripper. And the other side too. Just remember the teeth of these zippers, even though it looks metal, it's actually plastic. So if you're ironing it, just be careful. You don't melt anything. Got a little stray. All right, and I'm just going to bring this to the machine and sew it right on the edge. I'm going to back stitch all the way back. Keep it nice in place. Okay, you can trim your threads. All right, so now you'll see that we've got the zipper tabs on here, and I've got about a 1/4 or at least 1/2 inch actually. Well, sorry, more than half. Yeah, almost 1/2 inch on either side of fabric that I'll sew over instead of sewing over my zipper. And you'll see when we turn this right side out how big a difference that will make in keeping things nice and straight and boxed when we put this together. Okay, so we're ready to install the zipper. Did I just feel your collective like blood pressure raise? No, don't. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's actually quite a bit easier than you think. If your machine has a zipper foot, this is where you want to use it. Most machines come with a zipper foot. It'll look something like this, a skinnier kind of more rectangular. Sometimes they have 2 sides and you can put it on one side or the other. This is just a one-sided one. So you want to install your zipper foot. Your machine manual will have probably a picture of what the zipper foot looks like if you don't know, but you're going to want to install that on your machine now because it's going to help you get super close to the zipper. So this is how we're going to sew this on. I'm going to pull the zipper so that it's closed on one end, and I'm going to start sewing on the other end. So we want to go raw edges together. So we've got our exterior fabric. Then we've got our zipper, right sides down, raw edges together, okay? Now we're gonna take one of our liner pieces and we're gonna go right side down. So yeah, right side down. Remember we have the little marks here? There's a notch on this side and a notch on that side, so you'll have to be careful of your zipper pull, but you can line those notches up and put a pin. If you want to make sure it's really secure, you could put a pin on the edge too, but we're going to be sewing all the way down here. And I would probably put 3 or 4 pins because you want to make sure that zipper is staying flush the whole time there. And I like to pin with my pins coming off the edge like this, not necessarily like that. See how this sort of makes it start to split? But however, here the fabric stays nice and together. Here you run the risk of the fabric scooching down. So that's why I like to pin that way. But if you pin the other way, go ahead. I'm just saying why I do it. And you know, the more time you take to make sure that everything is lined up, really the better your zipper will look. Now let's make sure those little darts, see the darts there? That they are lined up so you can put a pin, and that's going to capture that little zipper tab too. Now you can feel the chunky zipper right here. When I get to maybe about here, I'm going to reach in and pull that zipper back up this way so that we're not trying to sew around it. That's why I want it to start at the end. Now, sewing your zipper is a lot about touch and feel. So get comfy with your machine, and I want you to place where you can feel the zipper teeth. So if I'm looking right here, I can feel the edge of the zipper, and that's where I want my zipper foot to go, is to be butted up right against, pull out a couple pins as I go, to be butted up right against the actual zipper. Now, my zipper foot allows me to sew right down the center, or I could move my needle over and be even closer. So I'll go right down the center so that I can see a little bit of that decorative zebra stripe. If you don't like the zebra stripe, sorry, we loved it. But if you don't like it, sew as close as possible to the actual zipper. So you might want to move your needle over more to the left. But I like seeing a little bit of that, the colored black and white stripe. And I'm setting my machine at 2.4 regular straight stitch. And I am going to back stitch here. And I'm not going top speed, but I am taking my pins out as I go and just feeling with my finger here the edge of that zipper coming down the line and making sure that my zipper foot stays nice and snug against that zipper. Okay, I can feel my chunky zipper pull coming up. So with my needle down and my presser foot up, so now it's not going anywhere, I'm just going to pull the zipper around my presser foot. Don't take your needle out, just maneuver it around. You should be able to. There we go. Make sure everything is still flush when you start sewing again, because remember now the zipper is open here, so you still want to make sure that your zipper, the right side of your zipper is against the raw edges of the liner and the outside fabric. I'm just putting that pin back in, presser foot down, and again just butting it right up against that zipper, the zipper teeth, and I am going to back stitch. Okay, one side done. Let's look. This is a very satisfying part. At least I find the first look at your zipper really makes you feel like you've done good. Okay, take all the pins out, and now look at this. This might feel a little funny, but it's going to make sense because now look, you've got a beautiful seam here and a beautiful seam here. So on the inside, you're not seeing anything, and on the outside, you're not seeing anything. Your zipper should lie just like this. We're going to repeat it on the other side, but first, we can press this down. Just careful of your bow here. You don't want to squash anything. So look at how nice that looks. Nice and flat. Now we're going to top stitch before we move to the other side. And you always want to remember to top stitch your zippers. It prevents them from rolling over. If I didn't top stitch this, at some point, it's laying nice and flat right now, but at some point it would start to roll and you would end up getting your fabric caught in your zipper. So really make sure that you remember to top stitch. This is where I secretly wish I was using the yellow thread so that it would just meld all together, but I'll stay using the white so you can see. Now, I'm going to move my needle over to as close to the edge of the fabric. We're not stitching on the zipper tape. I'm stitching on the fabric because I'm going to make sure that that fabric stays down. Now with the top stitch, I'm not going to back stitch because the seam will get caught on its own in the real seam, and I don't want to see those back and forth marks because this is the sewing, the stitches that people really will see. So take your time. The zipper pulls at the end here, and if you have enough space, you can keep sewing, or you can stop and pull your zipper to the end and then keep going. Now look at how nice and flat that lies. Oh my gosh, this purse is so cute. I love it already with the black and white zipper. Funky. Okay, so we've got another side to do. Now we're gonna treat this whole piece here, just like we treated the zipper last time. So we have our exterior and we're pretending this is just a zipper. We don't care that everything else is attached to it. We're just treating this like it's one side of the zipper. Exterior fabric down. Then we put our zipper down, even though it's a whole chunky piece, zipper down. Then we're going to take the right side of our lining fabric, make sure those darts are lined up. This is my favorite part of getting the Cricut to cut out my fabric, is that the darts are so perfect. I'm just so bad at cutting out the darts accurately that it's a real kind of luxury. And then you kind of see why, like, oh yeah, it really is important that they're lined up. So I do like that. I do like getting the Cricut to cut for that exact reason. All right, so I'm gonna, just like I did with the last one, pin. Make sure my zipper tape is really up against both sides. Sometimes it helps to do the zipper and the bottom fabric and then bring the top fabric to it, if that makes sense, to line things up. Okay, so bring it to the machine. It doesn't really matter what side you sew on. I say have a feel around. To see which side feels like you can feel the zipper more. So I can feel the zipper myself more through the exterior fabric here because it's just one piece instead of all the pieces. So I'm going to sew it with the stabilizer side up. Again, just butting that zipper foot as close to the presser foot as possible. Back stitch. Don't run over your pins. Now I'm getting to where I can feel the big chunky zipper pull. So presser foot up and just pull that to the other side. There you go. And keep on sewing. And back stitch. Let's look. Ooh, so nice. So now look, we've got two sides where we don't see any seam. Everything is nice and polished. But again, I want to make sure I flatten that out because we have to do that top stitching. Look at the difference in the side that's top stitched in terms of how flat it lies and the one that hasn't been top stitched. Even with the zipper closed, you've got sort of this hump here. That's what's going to happen. So we want to make sure it's lying flat. And now we can just bring it back to the machine and top stitch it down. Make sure it's flat on this side. Yep. We're almost there. Okay, so I'm moving my needle all the way to the left here so that I can get a nice straight stitch all the way down. Look, you guys. Super neat, tidy. You just see a little whisper of that black and white popping through for just a little like hint of, you know, fun. Okay, it's basically time to sew it together. So now resist the urge to sew this together like this. You kind of think like that's how it would go, but it's not. Instead, what you do is you're actually putting the liner sides together like this, and then the exterior sides together, and then you sew around. That's the key to bag making, so that you don't see any of the seams when you open up the bag. So remember those darts, the ones we haven't used yet? Like, let's line those ones back up, because then we know everything is going to lay nice and straight. We also want to make sure these notches at the bottom are nice and straight. We're not going to sew those squares. So we're just going to sew until about a 1/4 inch before the end there. And that's because we're going to box out the bottom of the purse. If we sewed this straight down and the notches weren't there, you would just have an absolutely flat purse. But it's nice to have a little boxing, like a box on the bottom, so that it kind of, you could set it down and it might stand up. Or you can literally look inside your bag and see what's at the bottom. All right, so I'm just making sure those notches are lined up. Everything's nice and straight. Now, when it comes to the actual zipper, we're going to fold this in half toward the exterior fabric. So we'll end up just sewing over that end where the zipper is. Those darts are together. Okay, the other thing I want to do is on the bottom, before I start sewing, of the lining fabric, I'm going to put a double pin to signal me to stop sewing here, because I want to make sure, and it's funny, sometimes you think, oh no, I'll remember to stop sewing. How many times I don't remember to stop sewing? So the double pin signals my brain, stop sewing. Hey, why is there 2 pins there? Oh yeah, I'm supposed to stop sewing. Especially because it's a long stretch. So that's about enough room that we're gonna have a little hole to turn this right side out. Okay, taking the zipper foot off, switching back to my regular, either your regular foot or you can put your 1/4 inch foot on. I'm gonna put the 1/4 inch foot on and sew still at 3/8 of an inch seam. And I'm just gonna start kind of in the middle at the side here. And I'm going to sew all the way until I get to the corner. Back stitching. I don't need to go at top speed. I can just... Oh, I should have mentioned, and I'll do it right now. I'm going to take that pin out. Your zipper needs to be open here, you guys. I should have mentioned that, because we are going to have to turn this right side out. So zipper open, otherwise we'll have sewn the bag and we won't be able to open it from the outside. So folding the yellow in half towards the exterior when I'm going over the zipper. So you got a bit of a hump there when you're going over the zipper, but I'm confident your machine can take it. Now, make sure you're sewing at the 3/8 inch seam allowance, because that's going further to the left of your basting stitch. So we won't see any of those basting stitches on the side of the bow. You can see I'm just holding it with my finger when I don't have any pins left. And now before I get too close to the edge here, I'm going to backstitch. So I'm leaving about a 1/4 inch where that square is. And then I'm going to start about a 1/4 inch from that opposite square over here where that's notched out. We're going to box out those seams in a minute, so that'll become important. But backstitch again. You know, we're really constructing the bag here, so backstitching is good. You want to make sure everything's nice and reinforced. Again, I just stopped about a 1/4 inch before that notch. And I'm going to go a 1/4 inch in, backstitch. You do not have to sew this fast. In fact, if you're new to sewing, don't sew this fast. Sew slow. Okay, I can feel that zipper pull is a little close to the edge. So before I get it too close there, I don't want to close it all the way, but I just need to move it out of the way. Make sure that's folded in half towards the yellow. And I'm just going to slow down to go over that zipper hump, because that's a big hump. There we go. You got it. Don't run over the pins. Back stitch just before the corners. And now I just have that little piece to do before the double pin signaled stop sewing. I'll take those double pins out and I'll back stitch and then pick it up at the other side of the double pins and back stitch and going just to the about a 1/4 inch before the edge. Now I have that little edge. Oh, I have this side still to do too. I want to meet it where I started. So starting again a 1/4 inch from that edge of the notching, back stitch, and meeting where I started, and back stitch. You could make the argument to, why don't you just start at the notched edge corner and save yourself, you know, but these are their own beast. So we'll let them like just do their one job instead of having an extra seam. Okay, so now what we want to do is everywhere there's a notch on the corners, we want to pull this out. It's kind of like it straddles, like it opens its mouth, like a fish, like this. And now we've got these two seams on either side. We'll nest them. You can kind of feel it with your thumb and your finger. One can go one side, one can go the other. And you should have a relatively straight edge here. I want you to bring that edge to your machine and sew that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance straight down the mouth. So it's like you're sewing that mouth shut. Just like sewing that mouth shut. Back stitch on both sides, because this is the corner of the bottom of the bag. So this is, you know, sort of what it should look like. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you're sewing it straight across the edge there. And then same with the other side. You'll open up the mouth of the fish. And then the seam will go one way or another. You can kind of just let it go whichever way it naturally falls. And then sew that line, sew that mouth shut. And if you ever want to make bags or little pouches or anything where you need a boxed corner, this is exactly how you do it. And if this notch was, let's say this notch was, you know, a good 2 inches in, our bag would become longer and skinnier, but would have a much thicker bottom. So depending on how wide you want the bottom of your bag to be, like that's, you know, depends on how big the notch would be. Like if we notched out this far and had a really big wide mouth, then we'd have an even boxier bag if we were to sew across there. But we're just going to sew 3/8 of an inch. That's enough of a box for this little clutch. So it should lie flat like that when it's going into your machine, and 3/8 of an inch across. Back stitch, back stitch. Okay, and one more. This is why you leave the other hole, because you're going to sew all these shut. This isn't the hole that you want to be turning anything inside out or right side out from. All right, nest those seams together. Make sure it's lying nice and flat. Okay, so now we've got this weird looking on both sides. And you think, oh my gosh, my bag is completely inside out. But that's why we left this hole right here. Now's the fun. It's like sewing is kind of counterintuitive because you do a lot of things inside out and wrong side. And it's not till the end do you really get to see what you're making, especially with bags. So this is going to come out with the liner fabric out and you're going to think, oh no, I did it wrong. No, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. I gotcha. And then we're going to, but see the zipper's inside out too. This is why we needed the zipper to be open. Now we're going to pull that exterior fabric out. But before we get too far down the path here, we do need to rectify this little hole, or all the change and lipstick and Tic Tacs that we put in this purse are going to get lost in the seams. So you can, if you want, use a hand, you can hand sew it and whip stitch it so that you don't, or slip stitch it so that you don't see the stitch. But I don't really care that much about the bottom interior. So I don't mind just sewing it shut. But if it bothers you to see the seam, then you will want to hand sew this so that you can hide it. But I'm just going to go ahead and stitch right along the edge with a 1/4 inch. Even less than a 1/4 inch, right along the edge, just so that it's kind of pursed shut. So now my lipstick isn't getting caught anywhere. Okay, now we can start to push this right side out, and I want to do this for you and push this part out because to see why it was important to have that zipper tab here. Otherwise, this zipper would go all the way to the end and it would be very, very hard. You wouldn't get a nice corner. Now we can shove that liner right down in. Make sure it gets nice and boxed out. You put those boxes in there. Now, remember this purse folds. So we are going to take the iron and get all of these seams. So see how those notches created that boxed seam there? That's what that does. Both sides. Look at the front, it looks so good. Okay, we want to shove this back down in. But before I do, I'm just going to press it because it's sort of our one and only chance, and without taking this all out. So now you can see, apart from if you have a little seam on the middle at the bottom there, there's no seams on the inside of this bag because of the way we sewed it. So I'm just going to iron this so that it's nice and flat. So that when we look inside the purse, everything is looking very nice. And then shove it down way inside the bag. With my 2 fingers, I kind of like box down so that it's sticking right down where it's supposed to. Cute. All right, so I'm gonna get my bow in line here. And now, this is technically the bow upside down. We want the bow to actually fold over. That's how, see how the tab here? So now you can take some time and get your purse aligned how you like it. Make sure you don't have any little threads. And press it into place. If your zipper is acting a little wonky, give it a good press. The press at the end will hide a myriad of sewing sins. So let's press this nice and flat. So I'm just getting the iron kind of under the bow there. So you can keep your zipper like facing right out so you can see the teeth, or you can kind of tuck it like this so it's a little bit more invisible. And if you're going to do that, press it with lots of steam. So that it lies a little bit more invisible. Okay. It's cute, right? I like it. So you've got a choice. You can make a pretty thick strap, or you can make thinner. Let's go the thinner route. So I'm going to take my fabric and fold it in half, just like I did with the little strap handle. Again, the wristlet part is optional. If you have a chain that you want to reuse from an old purse, or if you just want to carry it, you can omit any of the strap parts. And now I'm going to fold this end in and press. And we're going to basically fold this in half. So if you want, you can either trim these corners like this so that there's no edge. That's going to prevent them from sticking out. So again, just trimming that corner, not all the way to the fold line. Leave about 1/8 of an inch so that it sort of looks like this. And then we can fold this in half. Press again, lots of pressing. And now I'm going to sew, just top stitch along the edge of both sides. If you're seeing any of your corners like peeking out, either trim it a little bit more or make sure it's tucked right in. I'm just going to lengthen my stitch to 2.4 here because this is a top stitch and we're going to see it. I'm going to back stitch. Now I can go along the other side too if I want it to really lay nice and flat. It's totally up to you. We can put another row of stitches there. And now I'm just going to weave this through. There we go. And now we'll just take the ends And I'm just gonna sew that end shut. Now, give your machine a hand here because it might be pretty thick. You can start just by rolling the wheel and see how your machine does. Especially on the back stitch. You don't want to break a needle or anything. It's pretty tough. And trim your threads. And now I'm going to turn this right side out. I turn it around. And you can top stitch that down if your machine can handle it, or leave it as it is, and you've got your little wrist strap for your bag. I love it. It's so cute. I think the yellow is super cute for fall, especially in this deep color, which is perfect. We're going into it right now. Take a minute and trim any extra little threads off. And I love the little extra hidden cute zebra stripe of the zipper that we see tucked in at the bottom there. Kind of cool that the Cricut could cut this out and we can make our very own clutch ourselves, because you know what? When you have got some great tools like the Cricut and the sewing machine, you really can create almost anything. So I hope this class was helpful for you. You sharpened a few of your sewing skills, and you will meet me back in the group for any questions that you have. And leave your, or if you have any questions that you want to leave in the comments, go ahead and I'll get to them after the class. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see your version of the convertible bow clutch. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you soon.